Chapter 1 Victor Frankenstein's Youth. I am by birth a Genovese. My family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My father was well known for his public service. He was respected by all who knew him. It was not until later in life that he became a husband and the father of a family. Because the circumstances of his marriage tell something about his character, I will describe them. One of his best friends was a man named Beaufort. He had been a wealthy merchant, but he had fallen into poverty, too proud to continue living in the same city where he had once been rich and respected. Beaufort moved to a small town. He and his daughter lived there, unknown and in wretchedness. My father loved Beaufort with the truest friendship, and he wanted to help him get back into business. After a search that took 10 months, my father found out where he and his daughter were living. He hurried to Beaufort's house, but when he arrived there, misery and despair alone welcomed him. Beaufort had been unable to find work, and his grief had made him ill. 3 months after moving, he lay sick in bed. His daughter, Caroline, had done what she could to take care of him. The small amount of money they had was almost gone. She had found work braiding straw. Several months passed in this manner. Beaufort grew worse. In the 10th month, he died in Caroline's arms, leaving her an orphan and a beggar. This blow overcame her, and she knelt by Beaufort's coffin, weeping bitterly. Just then my father entered the room. He came like a protecting spirit to the poor girl, who put herself in his care. He took her to Geneva, where she lived with a relative. 2 years after this event, Caroline became his wife. My parents were very happy together. They spent several years traveling through Italy, Germany, and France. I, their eldest child, was born in Naples and, as an infant, went with them to their trips. For several years, I was their only child. When I was about 5 years old, we spent a week on the shores of Lake Como in Italy. One day, while we were out walking, we passed by the cottage of a poor peasant family. There were 5 children, but one of them attracted my mother far above all the rest. This child, who appeared to be about my age, was thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold. It seemed like a crown on her head. Her brow was clear, her blue eyes cloudless. Her lips and face were so sweet that she looked like an angel. The peasant woman told my mother about the girl. She was not her child, but the daughter of a nobleman. Her mother was a German and had died while giving her birth. The infant had been placed in the care of these good people. No one knew if the child's father was dead or alive. With my father's permission, my mother persuaded the peasant family to let her take the child. They were fond of the sweet orphan, and they thought it unfair to keep her in such poverty. They talked to their village priest, and the result was that Elizabeth Lavenza moved in with us. She became the beautiful and adored companion of my childhood, more than just a sister. We were brought up together. There was not quite a year's difference in our ages. We lived in perfect harmony, never fighting or ever disagreeing about anything. Elizabeth loved poetry and the beauty of nature. She admired the shapes of the mountains. She delighted in the changes of the seasons and the silence of winter. She found excitement in our alpine summers. While she was interested in the magnificent appearances of things, I delighted in investigating their causes. The world was to me a secret that I desired to understand. After the birth of our second son, my junior by 7 years, my parents gave up their wandering life. We owned a house in Geneva, and we also had a country home. It was about 4 miles away on the eastern shore of the lake. We spent time mainly in the country home. We lived a rather secluded and quiet life. It was my temper to avoid a crowd and to attach myself to only a few people. My closest friend was Henry Clerval, the son of a merchant in Geneva. He was talented and imaginative. He was deeply read in books of chivalry and romance. He composed songs and wrote many tales of enchantment and knightly adventure. He tried to make us act in plays about knights and heroes. I had an eager desire to learn. I confess that neither language, government, nor politics held any interest for me. It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn. Clerval, on the other hand, was interested in heroes and adventurers. His dream was to become one of those whose names are recorded in history as being brave and gallant. The saintly soul of Elizabeth was ever there to bless and inspire us. She was the living spirit of love to soften and soothe us. No human being could have had a happier childhood than I. When I visited other families, I became even more aware of how lucky I was to have such kind and indulgent parents. I felt great pleasure in these memories of childhood before misfortune tainted my mind. In speaking of my early days, I remember the birth. When I was 13, I started to read the works of Cornelius Agrippa, Paracelsus, and Albertus Magnus. My father said, "My dear Victor, do not waste your time on these books. They are sad trash." He should have told me that modern science had completely disproved their ideas. If he had, I would have thrown them aside. It is even possible that my thoughts would have never led to my ruin. As it was, I continued to read these authors. They seemed to me treasures known to few besides myself. I took their words as truth, and I became their disciple. I began to dream of the glory that would be mine if I could banish disease from the human frame. Nor was this my only vision. The raising of ghosts was a promise freely made by my favorite authors. The fact that I could never do this only made me doubt myself. I thought it was because I lacked experience or had made some mistake. I never once doubted my teachers until an accident again changed my ideas. When I was about 15, I saw a violent and terrible thunderstorm. As I stood at the door, I saw a stream of fire come from an old and beautiful oak in our yard. As soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared. I never saw anything so utterly destroyed. At this time, a man who knew a lot about natural philosophy was visiting us. Excited by what had happened, he began to explain his own ideas about electricity. Everything I had been studying grew suddenly uninteresting to me. I began to think that nothing would or could ever be known. I gave up the study of natural history. I immediately began to study mathematics. I thought that because mathematics could be proven, it alone was worthy of study. When I look back, it seems to me that this sudden change of interest was my last chance to have a normal life. If I had continued to study mathematics, I would never have conducted the experiments that led to the tragedies of my life.